All right then, lovely people. My name's Andy. If we've never met before, nice to meet you. If we have, it's possibly because you're one of my Brilliant Club students. And this is the first of what I'm calling catch-up sessions. I guess this is session 1, part 1. And what the point of this is to get you up to speed. If you're not one of my Brilliant Club students, I hope you enjoy it. I hope you find it useful anyway. Session 1 of my Forget the Tanks course is very much a kind of get you up to speed, because the main focus of the course is on the years 1917 and 1918. It's primarily focused on Britain and Germany during the Great War, and the question which will come up as an essay question at the end of the course is, why did Germany surrender in November 1918? So we sort of gear up towards that. We focus on Britain and Germany because, you know, this is a course aimed at British school children, and their main enemy through the war was Germany, and so that's the focus. Session 1, like I said, split into 2 parts really. First one I would ideally not be doing in schools anyway, because the hope is that students looking at this sort of stuff at Key Stage 3 will have covered some of the basic elements of the First World War. This course is a Key Stage 4 course, so it's aimed at students who are doing history at GCSE. And it's kind of a bridge really between what you may end up doing at Key Stage 3 in history on the First World War, and on Key Stage 4 in history on Weimar and Nazi Germany, or possibly at A-level, because my experience is that essentially when you do the First World War at Key Stage 3, it'll be you'll spend time looking at the causes of the war. You'll spend time looking at trenches, trench life conditions, weapons will maybe take a lesson or two. You'll have a look at, I guess, alliances and who was fighting in the course of the war. And if you do get to look at a battle, it will, well, in Britain, it'll almost uniformly be the Somme. You may end up looking at the Third Ypres campaign in a kind of a cursory way, more like tying that in with conditions, to be honest. And so you may not do any kind of developments of the war through 1917, 1918, which they're quite important years. So this is this bridge. Okay, then you'll jump straight to Versailles, right? The big battle of the Somme, and then there's some more stuff. And the last 2 years of the war is generally summarized as and then the British got tanks, and then the Americans turned up, and that was that. Okay, no, okay. So we're gonna kind of develop this a bit. That's the hope. Part 1 of session 1 is just in case you hadn't done much on the start of the war and the causes of the war. So this is all spun off from my classroom sessions, really. So there's a bit of death by PowerPoint here, but we'll try and rumble through this quickly. I don't want any of these kind of catch-up videos to be much longer than sort of 25 minutes, half an hour or so. So we'll see how we go with this one. But this is session 1, part 1, and I'll cut off part way through when we get into the sort of serious meat of the first session. Outbreak of war. Now, that's a modern map of Europe. You see loads of countries there, a lot that didn't exist in 1914. 1914, fewer countries, big empires within Europe. And so look at Austria-Hungary and the German Empire, which was massive, much bigger than Germany is now. And if we kind of, I know that the kind of alliances and the Entente are drawn on there. If we essentially summarize Europe at the start of the 20th century by saying nobody really liked anyone, I think we're pretty close to the mark. It's only people didn't like Britain all that much. Britain's status at that time was the world power, essentially, largest empire in the world, largest economy in the world, and not too much threatening that status, to be honest. So when we think about, you know, who actually wants war in 1914, Britain doesn't. Britain wants things to stay exactly as they are. The status quo works. Doesn't work for all these countries, though, particularly, and Germany kind of we end up talking about a lot as a new country at the start of the 20th century, only kind of unified in 1871. So it's less than 30 years old at the start of the 20th century, and their industry pretty serious. Their leadership is pretty serious as well. And we kind of get to the start of the 20th century, and there's very little reason that they can see why they shouldn't have a decent sized empire, if not on the same sort of scale as the British Empire. And certainly at least the French Empire, but hey ho. So not as many countries, big empires. Nobody really liked anyone else, but Europe was peaceful. They had sat down for the most part and sort of realized that if they go to war every time their empires touch, they're just going to be fighting all the time. And so, yeah, peace at that time. Friendships and alliances. Yeah, Britain becomes friendly with France and Russia. I suppose you've got to consider how friendly these countries had been in the previous century. I mean, Britain's fought any number of wars against France, of course, and Britain's last major war against a first-rate power was in the 1850s, down in Crimea, down here, fighting against the Russians. So historically, these empires in blue there do not get on at all. So it takes quite something for them to become friendly, but it's a powerful journey. That plays a part in that, especially among the French and the Russians, who enter into this cast iron alliance. If war breaks out between either one of them and Germany, then the other's coming in to help. Britain's not part of that necessarily, and actually Britain's kind of relationship with the European powers, I guess you could say, it's always a little bit strained. What was the threat to France and Germany? Well, to France and Russia? It was Germany's powerful army. How much of that is a threat to Britain? It's not really. I mean, unless they're going to load, their soldiers onto ships, and not much of a threat at all. So, France and Russia strongly aligned. Britain doesn't like the look of a strong Germany particularly, and so I guess they say, if European war breaks out, then it's not going to come in on the side of Germany. Put it that way. I think that's about as much as they've got from Britain. Militarism, you'll hear this a lot. If you've done First World War at Key Stage 3, there will have been conversations about militarism. That's a picture of the world with its horrifically incorrect projection, and really very much emphasizing the things in pink, which were the British Empire, but Canada, Australia, India, New Zealand, South Africa, big chunks of Africa, part of the British Empire, and the various other European empires registered on there as well. He looks nice. That's Kaiser Wilhelm II, and that's King George V, the respective heads of state of the German Empire and the British Empire at the start of the 20th century. Now, there's quite a bit made of the fact that these two were cousins, and so indeed was Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. Don't get too hung up on that as far as causes for war go. Certainly, when we come to George V's involvement in Britain's declaration of war, he's not really involved at all. To be honest, the Kaiser is more so. He decides whether or not Germany goes to war, and indeed Nicholas does. But it's less kind of family feudy than is sometimes portrayed. Each country is looking after its own interests, really. You may also hear talk of a naval arms race when it comes to the causes for the war. That is state-of-the-art battleship. I think that's a French one. In the kind of late 19th century. It's kind of weird looking. It's almost like the Monopoly kind of warship that goes around. I mentioned that Germany's big strong army wasn't much of a threat to Britain. It's true, it's not. But there's certain things that Germany could do that would really annoy Britain. Firstly, stoking up trouble within the British Empire. So expressions of support for the Boers down in South Africa, when the Second Boer War was going on, and Paul Kruger's leadership down there. Britain's not impressed with that. Even less impressed with the sale of weapons to the Boers, but Britain was doing that as well. So don't worry too much about that. Stoking up trouble in Ireland was another thing. Actually supplying rifles to whoever wanted to fight over the issue of Irish home rule, which was very much part of the discussion in the early 20th century within Britain. anything like that to cause Britain problems. And so, Britain's already got its eye on Germany before the naval arms race gets going. Now, you think Germany's army's not a threat to Britain, especially. The one thing that they could really do would be to start working on their navy, because all of Britain's military power was in its navy at this time, really. A small professional army, which is good, man for man, but not very big. But navy, projecting power and controlling the world's waterways, controlling the world's trade routes, that was Britain's power. And so Germany started laying down warships at the end of the 19th century. That really irked Britain. What are you doing that for? Why would you do that? It can only be to challenge the British Royal Navy. Now, Britain starts laying down warships in response. We get to 1906. And that's a computer-generated image of HMS Dreadnought, again, which you may have heard of, which at the time of its launch was the fastest, scariest, hardest battleship in the world. New turbines generated a huge amount of power, and Britain launched that and thought, all right, we're done here. Naval arms race sorted. Germany's response was pretty much, ooh, we like the look of that, let's make some of them. And so this continued. The naval arms race went on, I guess, until 1912, I guess you could say. It's pretty much over. But yeah, a few years of Britain and Germany looking at each other and laying down warships. In the end, Britain wins the naval arms race. It's just not something that Britain can afford to lose. And with military spending going up, Russia and France both think, right, okay, we're going to start working on our military as well. Thing is, we're kind of friendly with Britain. Britain's going to control the waterways. We're going to build our armies up. So France, Russia, they start working on their armies in this time. And Germany thinks, oh, hang on a minute, we better start working on our army as well in response to this. So they have to funnel money off there. So the naval arms race done dusted by 1912, with Britain having won it pretty comprehensively, but relations very, very poor with Germany. And that's the kind of tee up to this. When we get to 1911, there are certain plans just in case of war, and Britain's kind of thinking around sort of 1911, 1912 was along the lines of, right, who's our next major war going to be against? All right, well, it's probably Germany. Okay, we don't get on well with these guys. So it's probably going to be Germany. If so, where is it likely to be fought? And as far as Britain was thinking, it's probably going to be northern France and Belgium. Okay, because it's quite close to us. Okay, we presume the French are going to be on our side in this war as well, so they're going to be fighting. So we're going to go and assist the French, and we're assuming Russia's going to be fighting in the east as well. Were they right? Absolutely 100% spot on. As it turned out, it's a question of what you do about it once you kind of have a sneaking suspicion what the plan's going to be. This is a picture of, or a diagram of, the Schlieffen plan. What became the Schlieffen-Moltke plan, which is essentially Germany's efforts to close the war down on the Western Front very, very quickly, so that they can then transfer their strength to go and fight the Russians in the event of a two-front war. They're essentially going to have one front war very quickly, and then one slightly longer war against the bigger enemy, Russia, massive. And so, yeah, this big sweeping motion of their armies as they advance through Belgium, not necessarily to conquer Belgium per se, but very much in a, we're just going to go and smash the French now. Do you mind? They did mind, as it happens. Did we have any ideas about what, precisely what they were going to do, Germany? Well, we had a reasonable idea, and we'll come on to that in just a sec. But French plans were to go mad on the offensive, which they duly did, while Britain controlled the sea and prevented any kind of German naval action against their coastline, which meant that the French could concentrate their strength down in the Mediterranean, which seemed to work for the alliance partners, or Entente partners, I should say. Did we have any ideas what the Germans were up to? Yes, because in the years leading up to the war, we saw where Germany had built its railways. And you see there's a big concentration on that left-hand side of the map, right up to the Belgian border. And they're not for industry, they're not for population centres. We sort of sussed it out that these were for detraining soldiers. So Britain and France kind of knew what the German plan was before it happened. It's just, like I say, the question was doing something about it. This will be something that you hear of if you do a little bit on the opening of the war. This is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary by Gavrilo Princip in Sarajevo on the 28th of June 1914. Now, if you've taken that to be the kind of the moment that Britain, the Europe goes to war and Britain's in on the war, then you kind of missed a bit, I guess, because Britain didn't declare war until the 4th of August. This guy was shot on the 28th of June. What was Britain's reaction to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary? Oop, what? For the man in the street, that's not very nice for him. There were other things dominating the news in Britain at that time. Suffrage in Ireland, mostly women's suffrage in Ireland, really. It's not until ultimatums start getting issued that people really start noticing. And then you get that cascade of alliances that people talk about. And the blank check from Germany to Austria-Hungary, we'll let you sort out your southern issues. We've got your back on this. And the Treaty of London 1839, which is actually the big part of what finally brings Britain into the war. What did bring Britain into the war? Not really the mobilization of all these other countries, although it may have done in time. It's the invasion of Belgium that they kind of always suspected may happen when Germany piled troops through. Britain was a guarantor of Belgian neutrality. So was Germany, as it happens, and France and Russia. All the big countries said, we're going to leave Belgium alone, and then Germany lumped troops into it. Belgium called for help, and Britain had to answer. Belgium's always a little bit of a funny case for Britain, just its proximity to Britain. It's so close, and you've got big ports in Belgium. If I were going to invade England from Europe, it would probably be from Antwerp, is where I would plan it. And that's in Belgium. So that's it's not just the chocolate or beer that makes Britain prioritise Belgium. It's how close and threatening Belgium can be in the hands of a hostile power. And so, 4th of August, Britain declared war on Germany. Did they declare war on anyone else? Well, eventually, yes, but initially, no. It's just Germany. A couple of weeks later, they declared war on Austria-Hungary, Germany's ally. And as time wore on, the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria and other countries too. But initially, it's Germany. So when we're thinking about what Britain's cause for war is, it's really, really focused on Germany. Okay. Now, the war in 1914, we're going to gloss over this incredibly quickly. Those are Russian soldiers. These are French soldiers marching around under colours. These are German soldiers with their pointy hats. There are huge numbers of men killed in 1914 before the kind of the stalemate sets in and soldiers and armies take to trenches in the way that we kind of understand that the First World War to have worked. What's killing them? Well, I suppose I can demonstrate with a shrapnel shell. Oh, there's one over here. So this is a shrapnel shell cut away with hundreds of little balls in, and the shell goes, well, it would normally, when it gets fired, it would normally have a little kind of head on like that, and it goes wheeling off through the air, and at a timed point it sets off a little charge in the shell in this part, which blasts all these little metal balls out, and against men moving around in the open, as many thousands were in August 1914, it's just murderous. And I think the bloodiest day of the war for any one army is the 22nd of August 1914. So the war's less than 3 weeks old, and the French army lost 27,000 men dead in one day, and double that number wounded. And it's this. There's a huge amount of metal flying around in in the war. And I know machine guns often get the kind of headline stories, but actually artillery was the big killer. Germany advances, takes a lot of ground, captures most of Belgium, a large chunk of France, even is driving the Russians back. Britain does commit a force, but there's not very many of them. 4 infantry divisions and a cavalry division. It's something like 100,000 men that Britain sends over in that kind of first wave, which I guess sounds like a lot, and it's certainly bigger than Britain's army is now. But Germany mobilized 3.5 million men in the first couple of weeks of the war, so it's different scale stuff really, and Britain would have to try and catch up, as it were. And that's when you get into the business of recruitment, and I'm sure you're familiar with the chap with the moustache, Kitchener of Khartoum. Yes, he ended up as the poster boy, although it's not really that poster that brought significant numbers in. You're talking about sort of local recruiting campaigns that did the job there. Anyway, this course is not about that. Weapons, loads. Again, we would sit in a classroom and try and think about what you can come up with, but artillery is always the big killer. The speed with which these things could be reloaded, or just the weight of the projectile and the destructive power. Bang, bang. 9.2-inch howitzer. There's one of them. What was that? 15-inch. Anyway, big gun. Yeah, so artillery dominates the battlefield, and that would only continue through the course of the war. You almost can't plan anything without thinking about what your guns are going to be able to do for the infantry, or do to the infantry, potentially, if you're defending. Anyway, that's the kind of summarizing 1914 just really quickly, and a little bit on weapons. We move into 1915, again summarizing really quickly. The nature of the conflict, well, I guess stays the same, in that we're all trying to kill each other, but the combatant countries have taken to trenches now, and so different solutions are needed. They've essentially dug in against each other, and so they're trying ways of breaking through, restoring movement, and ending the war successfully, and everyone's trying to do that. The French go big on the offensives again and lose a lot of men again. British do launch kind of cooperative actions, but it's very much the French in the lead on the west. Britain's grand plans in 1915 involved not really fighting the Germans if you can avoid it. The Germans look really strong. Let's not fight them. Let's fight other countries that we might score a bit more of a win against, which, on a strategic level is not a hateful plan, but it never works. And if I'm going to summarize 1915 in 2 words, it's this: nothing worked. So we're not going to fight the Germans. Who's Britain going to fight instead? We're going to attack the Ottoman Empire around this part of the world, and try and force battleships through into the Black Sea or the Sea of Marmara to go and threaten Istanbul, or Constantinople, as it was known. Didn't work. I mean, they tried sailing battleships up through the straits to get up to Constantinople in March of 1915, and it was pretty disastrous. 6 battleships either sunk or very heavily damaged in a single day. The Turks were not born yesterday. They mined the straits. So we want to send minesweepers up to clear out the mines, but the minesweepers keep getting shot from the shoreline, so they needed to land troops to clear the guns, to send the minesweepers up, to send the battleships up, and that meant landing troops on the Gallipoli Peninsula, and that didn't work either. And that's the SS River Clyde full of soldiers trying to get ashore, and struggling, although eventually managing it, but never breaking through, never capturing or clearing the peninsula, and so that didn't work. The 1915 campaign in Mesopotamia wasn't too bad, but they overstretched themselves and ended up in real trouble, and ended up fighting against the Bulgarians in Greece and Macedonia as well, to try and poke a hole somewhere, and none of that really working. The Germans pioneered the use of poison gas in April 1915, and although it was horrible, it didn't cause a lasting breakthrough. So you can say that didn't work and just made the war more horrible. It would continue to be used throughout the war in different capacities, different gases as well. I know mustard is the famous one. The first one uses chlorine. Actually, the most lethal of the lot was one called phosgene, but yeah, that's that. Flamethrowers as well come into play on the Western Front, first used by the Germans in the First World War. The Russians are kind of headline news in 1915 in how poor their performance is. They're being marched backwards too, which was of concern to the British. Empires mobilise, continuing the theme of recruitment, really. These are French Zouaves, North Africans, French West Africans as well. These are Australian soldiers, and the Indian Army comes to be the largest volunteer army in the world. Which is all pretty impressive. The Indian Army tended, apart from the kind of early stages on the Western Front, where they pretty much saved the day, actually, the Indian Army tended to fight in other theatres than the Western Front. Just from a kind of supply and logistics sense, it kind of made sense for them to be more engaged in Mesopotamia and Africa. Trenches, I mean, these are pretty makeshift French trenches. Were they new for the First World War? First time ever fighting in trenches in history? Nah. I think this might be the American Revolutionary War. Established siege technique. They're not new. Men behind earthworks had fought the American Civil War. There'd been trenches in the Russo-Japanese War. Look that one up if you want. So it's not a brand new thing at all, but the level of sophistication, I kind of want to say, comes up. Plus just the scale, quite frankly, the fact that, you know, this is, you've got hundreds of miles of trench line, opposing trenches. You've got frontline trenches, support trenches, reserve trenches, communication trenches running between them. You'll have saps going out into no man's land. It's really technical, I want to say. I won't dwell too much on it, but you know, from end of 1914 really through till, yeah, I mean, you could say 1918. You could say 1917. The trenches are looking maybe a little bit different. You've got outpost lines and things like that. But this is essentially the front for most of the war, the Western Front. So you've got tiny top little bit of Belgium up there that's still in Allied hands, still Belgian hands. The rest is occupied by the Germans, and the red line runs all the way through France, through the Vosges Mountains down here, and then off to Switzerland. And it's about 500 miles of trench line. Now, it's flipping long way, and I know because I've cycled it, and it was tiring. So in 1915, that's not quite a correct map, actually. That's advanced a little bit from there. All of these maps I've nicked from the internet, by the way. Sorry. But that roughly kind of shows the situation-ish and what the Allies were facing. And you see there's a lot of red. There's a lot of red in territory that should be blue. And so the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, in a position of real strength at the end of 1915. Italy had joined the war. The performance wasn't wonderful. They're trying to attack through some very, very difficult terrain, and they've got all sorts of problems, really, the Italians, from kind of linguistic difficulties with their own soldiers. Everyone speaks different dialects there. Who knew? Anyone who has ever been to Italy, possibly. But they're trying to fight through mountains as well, and very, very rocky, difficult ground. The Allied attacks through 1915, pretty ineffective, either by the French and British on the Western Front, French and British down in Turkey or wherever. It's not quite happening. The British Army's growing significantly, and that's the thing. You put the call out for volunteers, and lots of people did volunteer. Okay, trouble is, turning your geography teachers and bus conductors into soldiers is not a simple thing, I suppose. So, or not a quick thing. I mean, turning them into killers is kind of the first thing you've got to do. But then turning them in from kind of, right, we're now really aggressive and we want to charge at the enemy, into actual modern soldiers is quite a tough gig. But poor British military performance had led to a change. The man who had been commander-in-chief of the British armies in France and Flanders, Sir John French, he was probably the right choice to begin with when the British Army was small, because he was a known figure and popular, as it happens, had good relationships with the men. The thing is, the British Army is expanding from a force of around about 100,000 or so to millions, and there you don't need a fella who's good with the lads. You don't need a fella who rides around and visits and hello and everyone gets a wave and you go 3 cheers. No, you need someone who is a pretty cold manager of people and who gets the right people in the right place, and for that they needed someone else. So Sir John French got the boot, and Sir Douglas Haig, who'd been commander of First Army, had come out initially with the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, in command of First Corps, and probably had done more than any other man in Britain, or at least as much as any other man in Britain, in terms of shaping the army as it was pre-war, and so a known and proven administrator, as well as a kind of dutiful soldier. Haig took over as commander-in-chief at the end of 1915. And immediately the kind of conversations between the British, the French and the Russians and the Italians was, right, okay, we need to get on with it. We need to get serious about this, because we're not in a position of strength. We need to change how we're doing things. And so this kind of sets up 1916, and it's kind of where I'm going to stop this video as well, because we'll pick up the story. I want to give proper time to talking about the big offensives of 1916, the Somme offensive in particular, because that forms part of the baseline assignment. Okay, the baseline assignment for my course. Anywho, that's probably enough for now. Any questions? Tough. This is a video. Do some research, or maybe they will be answered in another video. But as an introduction to Britain's joining the war, hope that was useful, and see you again.